Yeah, I think it's for the better. I think it's about time. Everything in my life is pushing me towards just vapid evangelism. So I'm here. I'm ready.
That's a great place to start. Good morning, everyone. This is episode 50 of the Three Body Problem on a day that Juanito celebrates his birthday. So let's start right there.
God.
Happy birthday, my friend. How are you?
Thank you. I'm alive. This continues. This thing just keeps going. I am at my least prepared, least slept, least put together. So considering that last time was the first episode I was not on in almost a year, I feel like I'm coming to represent the listeners. You know, I've got complaints. I've got complaints about cursing. I have thoughts about length. I learned a lot from Miko. It was actually really cool to hear Miko on here. I was kind of sad not to be here for that. He's always a fun interlocutor. So happy to be here somehow.
Glad to have you back. Happy birthday again. I hope this year around the rock is as good as it was last year and the year before. And if last year wasn't good, I hope this year is better.
Let it all be better. We need an upward trajectory at this. We'll take a hockey stick as well. That's fine. If it all can trend upward, we'll absolutely welcome it.
Since you mentioned Miko, let me thank Miko for popping on with us last week in your absence and talking drone warfare and his new life in that world. And that's a perfect segue to what we experienced last night into this morning. Good morning, Costin. We are at war again. We're doing this podcast on Friday, June 3rd. Oh my gosh, Friday the 13th at 8:25 a.m. and there's a war that's broken out between Israel and Iran. Costin, what are your thoughts on? I bring up the Miko and the drone robotics thing because there's a deeply embedded drone element into this story here. But when you see this Iran, Israel tied to nuclear, in your experience with all this, your experience doing all this research, how do you kind of process what's happening?
First of all, I talked to one of our good friends last night in Israel, and he asked me like, "Hey, have you seen the news?" And like, "No." And he said, there's a war coming. Like everyone's preparing around here, and I'm like, "I haven't seen any news, no." But when is this war gonna start? And he says, "Well, first of all, the big boss, Mr. Bibi, his son is getting married this weekend, so everybody knows for sure." If there's going to be a war next week, because like this weekend, big boss, his the boy, marriage, no. Right. This morning, I watched the news. I write him a message. Hey, I guess they didn't wait for that wedding after all. And he's like, yeah, it was a psyop. So it's exactly the kind of things that I would expect. But so far, it seems very, very one-sided to me. It seems that Israel is striking everything. And so far, all the attempts at some kind of retaliation, they are very feeble. They don't work. They're being intercepted. UK, US are intercepting all the Shahid drones on the way back. I would expect to have a lot of cyber activity. Unfortunately, nothing in the news. But I mean, from previous events and from previous wars, and we know that when something like this happens, there should be a lot of cyber activity.
There should be cyber.
There should be. Stuxnet 5.0, things like that, right? Taking off 100%. All the centrifuges at Natanz, Fordo, Qom.
Help me understand something. And again, in the full breadth of my ignorance, Iran announced that they were at like basically breakthrough nuclear fissile material last week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why?
I thought it was part of the negotiation, though. I
think if that was part of the negotiations, and these motherfuckers have not been paying attention for the past 10 years. This was, I assumed that the Iranians understood their leverage, which is you had leverage up until the point where you don't actually have the weapon, right? Like you have that leverage while we're in the in-between haha phase. Like you don't you don't have your own thing. Maybe we can give you a thing, right? Like that was the whole like the Atoms for Peace back in the day, and like sure. But the minute you get the thing, you're not negotiating shit anymore.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to go from we're about to be breakthrough nuclear power to like fighting other people who already have it. And then like, oh, once we reach parity, that's when we're going to sit down at the table. Absolutely not. Like
Nobody's sitting at the table with the North Koreans.
Yeah, exactly. I saw that announcement, and to me, it was like, okay, so I guess there's like we're going to war, and I don't understand that. Iran is probably at its weakest. Like its proxies have been kind of decimated. Hezbollah, which was like the strongest proxy they had, the Israelis strategically disposed of them in this like unbelievable fashion. I still don't think they get enough credit for that one.
The beeper
right?
story?
The beepers. I mean, dude, we went from like war with Hezbollah and like this shit show. And frankly, as somewhat of Lebanese descent, it was a really gut-wrenching situation because I don't think the Lebanese look upon Hezbollah with a very... No one's excited about Hezbollah in Lebanon. Lebanon used to be considered sort of like the French of the Middle East, right? The France of the Middle East, you'd go, gamble, hang out, and instead you have this like sort of religious insanity fueled by Iran. The Israelis knocked that shit off in one fell swoop. You went from the strongest proxy with the greatest force projection of any of Iran's, as far as, again, my ignorant view of the Middle East, to nothing. Houthis not doing well. Syria collapsed, like actually properly, finally done. I'm not saying they don't have anything else, but like obviously things with Hamas, not amazing. And what we've always known is that Iran, for all of its bluster, was never going to be able to stand up to a proper like war at home. So the whole point was living in the gray. And I just feel like somebody kind of missed the fucking memo. Like people got a little too sold on their own bullshit. Because the second that announcement went up, I was like, oh, okay. Like game over, right? Like we're not negotiating anymore. That's the end. That is the end of your bullshit grace period.
I feel like the signaling for war has been in place for the last week, though. I saw new reports of the U.S. pulling people out of Iraq in expectation of something going down. The negotiations would reach this 60-day mark that Trump had put this 60th-day deadline in place. Today is actually the 61st day. So it feels like, there was this big push towards a negotiation. It went to the final end. And according to Trump today, there's some hardliners that were keep blocking and they're no longer with us, which, comes back to this direct targeting of folks at this Shahid Beheshti University in Iran. And I want to bring up two things. One is we say there has to be major cyber components to all of this. All the intelligence is driven, obviously, by cyber and so on. The fact that we've never heard of any of this, the fact that we heard of previous Dooku 2 infiltrating P5+1 nuclear talks and so on was because we had a private sector company in the case of Kaspersky finding and documenting it. No one is finding and documenting any of this stuff, or if anyone is finding it, we're not getting any sort of public documentation. So we have to assume and kind of speculate about all the cyber angles. And I bring up the Shahid Beheshti University. They put out a statement today basically saying 5 or 6 of our professors were targeted and killed in this strike last night. We will show our nuclear capabilities, blah, blah, a lot of bluster and so on. And I tie all of that back to ask about the magnet of threats. Back in November 2014, you remember you guys were all involved in this. Kaspersky reported on this server belonging to this research institution in the Middle East, right? Known as the magnet of threats. Can we at least confirm that it was in Iran?
It was in Iran, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not. So we can narrow that down to Iran. Do we know if that magnet of threats was this university? Has that ever been public at all, Costin? Juan, go.
Go ahead, Juan.
I'm going to throw one thing. I thought, because of a lot of other discussions that we had, that we were talking about, what's it called? For Dower Magnum. It's not...
What?
Dower Magnum was the code name that the Americans used for it.
There was a target, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That was a certain target.
It was a certain
in the
university.
But you can, if I remember correctly, in those slides where they mentioned this, you can also see the IP address, or am I mistaken? And they speak about Turla there, if I'm not mistaken.
What are you talking about,
Was it
Costin?
Sour
Who they?
Magnum?
I thought it was Dower.
There's a leaked Snowden document in which they specifically talk about observing another APT group active at one of these Iranian universities. And I don't remember if it was Dower Magnum or Sour. I think it was Sour
I think it's
Magnum.
Dower, D-O-U-R Magnum.
Dower,
Sorry, I don't mean to distract, but like to me that was like another incident of. But it was a different university, if I remember correctly.
Correct? Can you find out which university it was?
While you guys are looking,
while I distract, let Costin actually speak of
Wait. While you guys are looking, let me just set it up for the audience. The Magnet of Threats was a server belonging to a research institution in Iran that simultaneously hosted implants for highly sophisticated threat actors. Regin, Equation Group, Turla, Itaduk, which was Russian language, Animal Farm, French language, Carreto, Spanish. So all these APTs were sitting on this one server. And in fact, Costin, that server was the starting point for the discovery of the Equation Group, correct?
Yeah, correct. One of my colleagues was looking for Turla infections. We were researching Turla back in 2013. And back then, Turla had this snake rootkit, which relied on a number of drivers to access a virtual file system, to do all sorts of things. And on one of these infected machines, he found a bunch of drivers, which he thought it was Turla, some kind of a new Turla. And he sent those to me saying like, hey, here's some new Turla drivers for you to take a look. And I was like, I load those drivers up in IDA Pro and look a bit, and these don't seem like Turla to me. These are something else, something different. And I think he made, first of all, he made the signature for those drivers, and then he found like a few hundred other infections around the world where pretty much everything was named the same way, perf nw.sys, if I remember correctly. That was the one of the drivers' name. But yeah, that story with the Sour or Dower Magnum, it's another very interesting, because essentially it feels to me that the guys who wrote that report, they were also observing a magnet of threats for one reason or another, and then they see another APT group active in that infrastructure. And if I remember correctly, there's an IP address in there that you can actually use to identify the name of that university. Now, if you ask me if this Shahed people are the magnet of threats, I don't remember if it was exactly Shahid Beheshti. If you ask me, what I remember, I think was a research institute. I can't tell you 100% it was a university because I don't remember. And again, the information regarding who they were was based exclusively on the IP description of that. So sometimes IPs, IP whois data is not quite reliable.
So we don't know for sure publicly. There's been no absolute documentation of who that magnet of threats, that server, who it actually belonged to.
As far as I remember, no. But I would assume they were a pretty important entity, considering they had Regin, Equation, Turla, Itaduk, Animal Farm, and Carreto on them. So there were like lots of different things, and some of them, I think, in my opinion, the best detail.
And research firms on there as well, doing research and seeing all this shit.
Well, the best thing, in my opinion, is that some of those were active at the same time. So like concomitantly, altogether, different APT groups active on the same machine, with all the risks. Again,
what
with
a
all
solid,
the risks
resilient
that
server. That doesn't go down, that doesn't crash, just stays alive while everyone is living there.
What solid implants, bro? I mean, like, fuck the server, right?
I think it teaches us a very important lesson, which is, as an APT operator, when you hit, let's say, some server and you see that on the same machine there's an antivirus and two other APT groups implants,
So it's
I
free
think you
APT.
should get the hell out of there as soon as possible, because this is essentially what everyone is looking for. And even like in modern citizen lab research, you see that they piggyback on the same concept, like an activist, and on their phone it's like three different implants. I don't know, it's like Pegasus and Cytrox running at the same time, or maybe a couple of months apart, and maybe triangulation as well, and then two different Pegasus operators targeting the same phone. So this concept, I think it remains a classic in the world of APTs and APT research specifically.
And this Shahid Beheshti University is the classic profile of who would be the magnet of threats, right? I mean, they've been sanctioned by the EU. I believe there's been some US sanctions against them as well. They've been linked to nuclear research activity for a very, very long time. There were previous cases of motorcycles blowing up, people related to this university as well. So it kind of fits into this magnet of threats, and it popped up today when they actually came out and says, hey, you killed 5 of our professors. We're not going to take this lightly. I just brought back the notes of the magnet of threats and trying to figure out. Juanito, you found anything you were looking for?
I'm still looking. I don't think it's exactly that, but it's funny because you know where I'm having to look inside of like my papers, like the thing Kosta and I wrote in like Virus Bulletin, like 2017, the fourth party paper, the deconfliction paper, because those are, I think, the only not like KL specific discussions of magnet of threats.
I found it. Dour magnet is a cover name used by NSA referring to the cyber threat activity targeting the Imam Hussein University in Iran.
I knew it wasn't the same one. Imam Hussein, yeah.
And this appears in leaked documents related to the CSE, Canadian Security Communications Establishment.
The best Snowden.
The best documents, correct.
Yeah, the best docs.
Yeah.
Juanito, all these organizations are royally owned by APTs, right?
Almost certainly, almost certainly royally owned, thoroughly owned. But I think what makes it interesting is the thing about the magnet of threats, like whichever one it is, whichever organization, whichever university, it's all what we're describing is more to do with like a dynamic about the organization itself. Which is to say, there are things that are important to a lot of different people. Iran's nuclear ambitions, for example, or its development of certain technologies are important to monitor for a lot of different people. And I think everybody gets hung up on this notion of like Stuxnet, right? You go, Stuxnet is a step beyond that. We know there's an issue and we want to do something about it. Whereas with just sort of like monitoring these thresholds, you have so many organizations on Earth that have a vested interest in figuring out sort of what's going on at this place. So the magnet of threats, more than anything, it just reflects a dynamic about sort of these overlapping interests. And it's interesting to hear, as we discussed our Magnum, that in some cases they have known that they were cohabitating. And for the West, that's usually like a no-go. Right, like what we
that's
learned
why territorial dispute was an actual thing. Right?
That's why territorial dispute was a thing. That's why like our discussions of deconfliction became a thing. Like deconfliction, honestly, the topic it wasn't completely foreign, but it really didn't land until we saw like, hey, no, like full on NSA or CIA or any of these like Western threat actors, they will not inhabit this same box. And I think that's an interesting thing to consider.
They will not inhabit, or they will kick someone else off. Why would you?
No. They should, at least by the way that we saw the tradecraft described and codified in that time. The notion was, you see something else, something like you've systematized this ability to see if there's something else there, and if you do, get the fuck off the box. Like, it's not a like find a way to mess with it, do it. It's literally get the fuck off.
As an OPSEC thing.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. Which, obviously it didn't always happen, but that's what you see. Like, that's the thing about territorial dispute that's so telling, because the driver list has all
what
of
was
these,
territorial dispute? Just kind of give the audience a quick background.
Territorial dispute, also known as TEDI, is a component. It's a description of a set of components in actually the Shadow Brokers leak, where what our friend Boldy from Crisis Lab Hungary, University of Hungary, basically figured out that there was a list, a set of scripts that operators who are operating sort of equation group tools and might find themselves on a victim box would be notified of, say, like, hey, there's like very rudimentary rules that would say, hey, like there's maybe Turla is on this box as well. Maybe this other signature, whatever is on this box. So they had a way of kind of codifying some of the threat intel they were aware of. And this is very, like, honestly pretty early on. The component is not like super, super new. And then there was a different component that I found even more interesting, which was it was drv_list.txt, which is basically a list of the names of drivers coupled with instructions. And actually, in the last episode I was on, we had this discussion of FAST16 that Kostin mentioned, and I showed the tattoo and everything. The tattoo is the line from driver list, which is FAST16. Nothing to see here. Carry on. What's interesting about this list is it shows the operator instructions. So normally you would get it could be something like unknown tool, like
pull off.
Pull off. A lot of it was instructions like that, where some of it was the friendly ones. Those are the funny ones. But like for the most part, what it showcases is a period of time when these APTs, it was like the rootkit era. And you basically, because half of the drivers were like Nero, like CD burning ROM, and you go, okay. But it was at a time when like Microsoft hadn't necessarily implemented code signing. You still had rootkits as this like fearful thing. And I guess you have APTs in the West going like, we really don't want to find ourselves in a box that's being instrumented by a different rootkit and might, be screwing us over. So that's a very, very long way of saying like there is this awareness and this almost this notion of like a compromised box. A box that's been compromised with somebody else is not a box we want to be in. And that's a very sort of uniquely Western and maybe uniquely American way of looking at things, as like a paramount tradecraft thing. And it's funny that that's the case, considering that ends up being their downfall. Like I'm sure that there were other ways in which we would have run into equation group stuff someday. And if the shadow brokers had released just driverlist.txt, we would have discovered all of equation group, like just with that text file. Like that's my belief. But it was ultimately their downfall with the magnet of threats.
What do you think the discussion was around not using another Stuxnet versus going a kinetic route this time around? You remember as part of the book, Kim Zetter's book, and a lot of the conversation was around going the Stuxnet route and using exploits and using cyber to do the disruption was a deliberate strategy to avoid going the kinetic route. Kostin, like, do you believe there's been other Stuxnets kind of buzzing around that we've never seen or heard of?
I would assume, because the Stuxnet story was so big, I would assume that the Iranians have taken all the imaginable measures to avoid another Stuxnet hitting their centrifuges. So if you remember, Stuxnet was replicating through these vulnerabilities, propagated through USB drives and through the network. So the most important thing would be just to make sure there's no new software coming into the network, computer network running the centrifuges. No CD-ROMs, no USB keys, just nothing. Like if you catch somebody with a CD-ROM in their pocket, they hang. If they catch somebody with the USB stick in their pocket, they hang. So once you take this kind of measures, it would become very, very difficult to target these facilities again in the same manner as Stuxnet. And if you remember, I would assume that somebody watching the process nowadays, they would know something is off. Like when the speed of the centrifuges changes randomly, this is not normal, so there must be like yet another Stuxnet. So you need to replace all the hardware, all the computers, and so on. So if you ask me, I would assume they've taken all the imaginable measures to prevent another Stuxnet from happening, which would make it way more difficult to target in the same way. So in the end, you have to rely on the kinetic methods to drop some bombs or send some people down there.
Kostin, I mean, I would take that two different routes. to your point, right? Would you, from the perspective of the folks who were able to build a Stuxnet, would you go the same route? Keeping in mind, right, like when we talk about Stuxnet, you had like a variety of different ICS attacks over the different versions, and some of them, like the famous like UPS targeting, like the power supply targeting, as opposed to the centrifuge targeting. Like it shows a certain pragmatism about it, right? Like if these motherfuckers are going to like be watching the centrifuges like hawks, you go, okay, well, we're going to target the power, where we're going to target the water, where we're going to target, some other way. There's so many ways in which, you have these interdependent systems. I guess I would have assumed, that it's an impossibility, but coming at it from a more pragmatic standpoint, the way that we started this conversation of like, well, weren't they basically asking for this war to start? Was the smart thing to do to keep them from being able to do a Stuxnet? Should they have essentially allowed that? Because that's the point at which I think some of the problems that you get with some of these regimes is that eventually you go from the kind of cynical people who know they're negotiating to the kind of true believers who forget that you're negotiating and think that the stated goal is the actual goal. And I think Iran's strongest position was not having gotten there yet. And in a way, a Stuxnet, quote unquote, a sabotage attack that's just keeping you from, it's taking Israel and America's resources and sinking them into trying to keep you from reaching some breakthrough state, is a way of making your adversary waste a whole lot of resources just to keep you in the same position that actually is your strongest, which is to say, we're getting there. Any minute now, we're going to get there. So you better take us seriously because we're about to get there. Should they have just let them do it? Should they have just let them keep them there, right? Like winning in this sense is almost like catastrophic failure for your negotiating position.
One, you mentioned the Beeper story that happened with Mossad in Lebanon. There's another component to this war that broke last night, was that several months ago, the Mossad began to smuggle missiles into Iran and secretly install swarms of explosive drones deep inside the country. Very much what we talked about last week with the Ukrainians getting deep inside Russia with these Trojan horse trucks and so on. This seems to be just a normal part of warfare now, Costin. Does this stand out to you as something that, again, crosses a Rubicon? Is this part of what, when we discussed the Beeper story in a long ago earlier episode of this, we talked about, imagine what, that had taken many, many years to get itself embedded. And we talked about, imagine what's happening now. What are some of the newer things that they're embedding now for use 5-6 years from now? The idea of getting drones and drone swarms deep into enemy territory, sneaking them in and getting them in there, seems to be like one of these, wow, man, this got to be happening at scale. This could happen to me. This could happen in our neighborhood back here in the United States. Like this feels like a part of war that's just frightening.
It is. And speaking, by the way, and I think it was super, super timely that we had Miko last week to talk about all these things about the fiber control drones, which practically are unjammable and all those things. It was even like today that I was looking into kind of a parallel story, if you want, the Abrams tanks that were sent to Ukraine and why we are not hearing about them nowadays. And I found that actually they've all been withdrawn from the front line, because they were like easy targets for Russian drones because of the turbine, this turbine that makes the Abrams tanks able to use pretty much anything as fuel, like, I don't know, cooking oil as fuel. It produces so much heat that they are like super easy target for drones. So this drone warfare kind of, if you want to render to one of the world's most advanced tanks, kind of unsuitable for modern warfare. So they're kind of redefining what it means to have a war nowadays. You see that the vast majority of attacks consists in one party sending a swarm of drones to the other party, and then it's all about how to avoid. It's like this cat and mouse game. How do you avoid The other part is defenses, so your drones don't get shut down, and the others are all about how do we shut down the drones and send our own back.
Yeah.
So I think that, in terms of modern warfare, drones are kind of not just redefining the rules of engagement on one hand, but I would be very interested to see how, and I know for sure that they are being used for this, how drones are combined, let's say, with cyber warfare to get access to certain places which, let's say, otherwise wouldn't be accessible. So, for instance, doing the kind of, if you remember the story that Stephen Adair talked about with Solfacy in DC and the Wi-Fi hacking, just imagine flying a drone over to your target to do some Wi-Fi hacking to penetrate their network, then you fly the drone back because maybe the target is, I don't know, on the 20th floor of a building, and there's no other good way of getting within range of that particular Wi-Fi network. So I think that these combinations, when you put together physical access through drone technologies with cyber, is going to be the kind of doing things in the future, and the things that will shift balances of power into one direction or the other.
Let me just read from the Washington Post reporting this morning. As Israel launched its air attack, the Mossad activated its planted drones, which struck missile launchers at a base near Tehran. So there was just another component to it. You start doing the air warfare and you activate the drones and take out some other things. It feels like drones and drone warfare will just be like a normal part of, like, we do this and this and this together. Anything from this stand out to you, Juanito?
I mean, I think the whole thing is fascinating. I said this to you guys in the chat yesterday, I think, where it's like, to me, the Israelis and the Ukrainians need, I mean, if we could stop to give them a medal, there is a sort of fascinating expression of true modern warfare and
by
frankly,
cyber intel.
Well, it's not cyber as much as like the ingenuity that's coming with sort of modern cheap equipment. And there have been some amazing discussions about this lately. Like I was really fond of, there's a talk by Halvar Flake, by Thomas Deline at SciCon that got dropped a week ago, where he's talking about sort of broader topics around this, but one of the discussions is essentially about the autonomous capability that we can bake into drones, and some very interesting observations along the lines of, essentially like how much you can defer the computing to the edge, such that you can have there's almost like a physical limitation on the economics and capabilities of having a drone that has a certain amount of energy. Right, like it's going to have a battery or a capability of a certain amount. It has a certain amount of compute,
and that maxes out.
It's all variables, right? There's cost, there's compute, like on the device, and there's energy, and at the very least, and I'm bastardizing Thomas's argument because I'm nowhere near smart, but if you think about these variables, essentially, right, the energy is your ultimate limiter of range. How far can this drone fly and come back, right? The compute is the limitation on how much it can do autonomously, right? Like if it has no signal, if it gets jammed, if it whatever, can it find its target? Doesn't know where it is, doesn't know where it's going. And similarly, that compute capability, the greater it goes, the greater the cost. So the less economically feasible it is to have 1,000 of these, 100,000 of these just sitting around in the sand somewhere in Iran, just waiting to spring up. So there's these like fascinating economics of sort of the not just the autonomous capability of these things, but also when it makes sense to use them as what's been described as expensive bullets. They're not expensive, they're not cheap weapons, or they're expensive bullets in a sense. And it is like I would have dismissed this rather simplistically, but this is actually the most interesting part of modern warfare in my view right now, is what happens when you can distribute a certain amount of evaluative power to the edge, and you can now have things that are just waiting. They're just traps. Like they're sitting in the sand. They're sitting in a container. They're sitting people do not understand how hard it is to keep things from going in and out of a country, a vast fucking country.
That's what I'm thinking. Like to get in swarms of drones deep into enemy territory without any sort of say. I mean, you've got to have like a lot of buttoned up people on the ground. It's fascinating to me that you can get this type of thing deep into a country. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, right? I'm 2.5 hours away from the Mexican border, where we're told it's wide open and people are streaming in and across, right? Like the idea that someone can get a drone swarm close to a U.S. city is not at all difficult.
Not at all difficult. I'll give you a more scary scenario as we keep embracing this futuristic.
Yeah, I'm not embracing
reality.
It, sorry.
Well, you may not. You may not. But everybody like around you will anyways, right? And you say that shit, but you have a fucking Tesla. So get the fuck out of here. You have an autonomous vehicle in your home.
This is true.
With actually quite a bit of capability, quite a bit of power at the edge, quite a bit of connectivity, quite a bit of energy. And so on.
This man is breaking my OPSEC, but go ahead.
Sorry. I don't know what to tell you. But actually what I was going to suggest is we're talking about smuggling drones into other countries because the drones are not already there and because those drones don't have like explosive payloads. But something that we need to consider is the more this becomes normal in human life, right? Like Amazon delivery drones, pizza delivery drones, like those, they're not beyond the realm. Actually, some of it's already in place. The question then becomes like, do I need to put drones in your country?
Or just take those over.
Or just take the one, like, because if you remove the explosive payload and we just talk about the fact that, like, I don't know, a flock of geese hitting a commercial airliner is enough to take out a jet, right? Like, there's a lot of shitty discussions to be had about what happens with the control of autonomous vehicles. So I will just say, I mean, congratulations to Mikko on making a brilliant, Mikko Hyppinen has made a brilliant career move, well, as always, sort of ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. But this is one of the problems of like this distributed autonomy and commoditized evaluative power in the 21st century. Shit is about to get crazy.
Costin, are drones a big thing there in Romania? Is there here in the US, people with disposable income, everyone's got a DJI drone in their house. They're like, you know, doing some aerial photography or making videos or whatever. Is it popular there?
I think it is, especially with the young people. I would say I have a bunch of friends, and like you say, pretty much everybody has a drone. And whenever they go in vacation, they take the drone with them to take some photos, some videos. Even I think a couple of months ago, there was a drone roaming around our house, like 2-3 meters away. I had no idea who was controlling it. And there were like people nearby thinking like to throw stones at it or to try to shoot it down with arrows. I mean, in the end, that's what it breaks down to. If you don't have any other solutions, you can try to throw stones at it. By the way, there's a funny video about the Patriot defense against the Russian Patriot defense against the Ukrainian drones. Like there are like some Russian Patriots throwing stones at the Ukrainian drones taking off from the trucks trying to strike.
I remember we saw some videos of that. Yeah.
So the patriotic defense.
All right, let's switch to some.
Go ahead. What I was going to say is just as a follow-up on this drone discussion, like we've been talking about sort of drones in Iran, which is quite fascinating because I'm very curious to know how the Israelis went about it. You have different economics. You have a totally different level of sort of technical skill. With the Ukrainians, it's fascinating because there is very much like a pragmatism of like FPV drones and like stuff that's already off the shelf, a lot of it made in China. But I just wanted to point out, like the reason we had the conversation in the chat yesterday, day before, is it's been pointed out that because of the drone attack, this Operation Spiderweb in Russia, the Russians have had to move their bombers to like Kamchatka, So now it takes 23 hours or no, sorry, was it 13 hours or what was it?
23 hours. I think
it was 23 hours.
Yeah.
To fly these fucking things to go bomb the Ukrainians. So you now have like a much wider window of like preparation, knowing they're coming, and being able to retaliate, and also just a general consumption of fuel. It takes more resources. It exposes these vessels in flight, and so on. It is a strategic win of epic proportions to be able to like to go from getting unilaterally, asymmetrically pummeled by the bombers of this other country to not just decimating them, costing them, I don't know, $20 billion worth of losses, but then forcing them to park that shit on the other side of the largest country on earth and gave yourself this strategic advantage. Like anyone who's looking at this drone shit is like, oh, that was like a cute little flurry that they did. No, the same as like the bombing of like the Kherson Bridge, the same as like the Nord Stream pipeline. Like you see Ukrainian ingenuity in these like intelligence coups, and they're not bullshit little flash in the pan. Like we did something cute and cool because we can do it. It's like, no, look at the strategic value of taking out that pipeline, of taking out that main bridge, of moving these not just shooting off these bombers, but then having them have to be placed so far away. Like this is where you see the true strategic import of like intelligence and subterfuge in warfare, in modern warfare, and it's fucking fascinating. Like all the things,
which means it's not going away either.
Oh no!
The fact that this is such a big win, it just means that you double down and triple down on this, right?
It's the reality of warfare now.
Can we talk about some cybersecurity news? I feel like I woke up to this war and say it just adds to everything else happening. But this week was Patch Tuesday. And on Patch Tuesday, we got a Microsoft Internet Explorer 0 day. I don't know if I can describe it as an Internet Explorer 0 day. It's like a WebDAV bug exploited with .url files. And there's some reporting that this was spotted in Turkey, hitting a Turkish defense organization. Checkpoint, who found the bug, put out a report on Stealth Falcon, which is a UAE, United Arab Emirates linked threat actor, largely focused on the Middle East and Africa. Any surprise to you, Costin, that we're still seeing this .url things that rely on Internet Explorer? It also shows that although Internet Explorer has been it's dead, it's not quite dead. It's living. The engine is living in certain places where these things are happening. What do you know? Have you been able to look at this at all?
Yeah, I did. I mean, this is a particularly interesting APT group that we used to call the Fruity Armor. If you remember, over the years, we found a lot of activity from Fruity Armor.
I forgot about Fruity Armor.
You forgot, yeah. Fruity
Shout
Armor,
out
it is.
Bart,
2018.
Bartholomew. Yeah.
And they were using like a lot of interesting tools. I think some people connected this. Perhaps it's not the right way to refer to them as a one thing, because over the years they morphed from one to another. You probably all remember the scandal with the U.S. Contractors that ended up in UAE working for a private company, Dark Matter, correct, and all that stuff. Now, Stealth Falcon / Fruity Armor, over the years, they've used a lot of very interesting tools. The other one that I remember it attracted my attention back in the days was this Salt Dragon that I don't know if was actually ever described in public, but it was a very sophisticated framework. I originally thought it was something way more advanced because it was like encrypted with the key specific to the motherboard of the computer it infected. They were leveraging 0 days, multiple local privilege escalation exploits in order to install themselves, vulnerable drivers. So the whole menu, if you want. And to me, the Stealth Falcons, Fruity Armor, they've always been kind of, let's say, on top of things, if you want. That's the word. Knowing what's happening in the region from a geopolitical point of view, but at the same time targeting all sort of connections, such as, for instance, contractors developing missiles in some of the countries, or any kind of connections with Iran. I think we've also seen targeted over the year. So it's not surprising that they're still active. This particular 0 day, if you want, is kind of lame, if you ask me.
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be special though. It's lame, but it works.
Lame.
Correct. It's a bit lame in the sense like, yeah, in this URL file you say this is the working directory, then you trigger a command which loads the route tool from the current working directory, which just happens to be remote. If you ask me, I never understood why Windows is so flexible in the sense that the current directory can be on a remote server and things like that, when in reality, the use cases are, I think, maybe 0.01% of what everybody needs. So that can probably be applied to many, many different concepts.
Legacy, bro.
Legacy.
That's 0.01% of
features that nobody
customers.
Needs. Features that nobody needs. But nevertheless,
there's 2 enterprises that require this with like an Excel macro somewhere.
Correct. But okay, that kind of gives us interesting stuff to research. And I also thought it was interesting, they were saying that in some cases they weren't using this 0 day but CPL files, which is like the 2000s spam email way of targeting people. Like,
but it works.
Here's these CPL files, which are just control panel executables, which by some magic somehow still people fall for a simple trick like that. I thought it was interesting the fact that they have this custom Mythic framework agent. I think this Mythic framework is super popular nowadays. I mean, a lot of different threat actors, they've adopted the Mythic framework, and then all sorts of different agents for the Mythic framework. And this private one that Stealth Falcon is using, called Horus agent, coupled with a lot of obfuscation, like this light Temida version they use to obfuscate it. It makes it kind of flexible, if you want. This is what I think is the word here, because whenever it gets detected, you can replace it with another one. The infrastructure can remain the same, or you just need to deploy another CNC. And there's a lot of open source agents in different programming languages, all sorts of different programming languages, which are compatible with this open source red team framework. So I think, Fruity Armor are also evolving together with pretty much all the others.
But they've been using 0 days since we first documented Fruity Armor back in 2018. So these guys are fairly active, and let's call them professional. Juanito, what do you know about these people?
So not as much as I'd like to, mostly because to me, first of all, I'd forgotten that we call it Fruity Armor. I forgot sort of the connection. But more than anything, I think this is a group that, to Kostin's point, has evolved in different phases and different seasons with different toolkits. Like, what's interesting about Stealth Falcon is really that what you see is like a very well-resourced organization with a variety of toolkits and a variety of different sort of ways of trying to accomplish things over time. Clearly a great deal of resources. And what makes it sort of fascinating is this notion of seeing sort of a not truly Western organization, clearly wealthy, clearly capable of involving both like proper cutting edge mobile toolkits, even if they're sourcing them if they have to, and the variety of sort of like components that you'll see of its own sort of resourced APT. So to me, this is one of these that I assumed not paying close attention to it, right? Like not latching on to the APT proper means I have no idea what they're up to anymore. I can talk to you about a Fruity Armor of 5 years ago. I can tell you of a Stealth Falcon of 3 years ago. But you tell me, okay, so what does that mean about what they're doing today? To me, that's like, I have no clue. That depends. Who's still in that country? Who are they buying from? You know, what are the dynamics around that? What about the companies that have now moved to the UAE? What about, you know, we got reports of like, thanks to the Doge cost cutting in the U.S. government, you have now maybe enabled some very interesting new technology transfer to our friends in the UAE. So when are we going to see sort of the DDS folks with some AI like working out of whatever Stealth Falcon and Fruity Armor? And I mean, look, to their credit, to the credit of the UAE, that they're investing into this for whatever their own purposes are. But this is one of those where I know my ignorance right off the bat, because for me, Fruity Armor was very interesting in that every time you caught a glimpse of them, it seemed that they were using some slightly other, like different toolkit, different exploit delivery mechanism, buying some other thing, playing some other game. So that is just not an actor that I would look at and go, yeah, I know how these guys operate. Not at all.
According to Checkpoint, the high-profile targets in the government and defense sectors observed in Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, and Yemen fits into the profile of what we think this actor is, right?
Pretty much.
Let's switch to China quickly. Sentinel-One actually documented a year-long activity around Chinese APT doing some reconnaissance of its network. Can you talk a little bit, Juanito, on the motivation for putting this out first? I mean, you made it clear there were no compromises at Sentinel-One, but you observed this thing over the year. Can you summarize the report for us?
Yeah. So the motivation, I think, is quite clear in that this is one of the follow-ups to the top tier target blog that Alex Milenkowski, Tom Hagel, Jim Walter, the folks at Labs put out during RSA. And the whole point of that, as I think we discussed at the time, was to say, hey, security vendors are an important target. They're not being ignored. Why is nobody talking about this? Like, let's make a point of, I think that the team wanted to sort of lead an example of saying, hey, like, this stuff is happening. Not only is it happening, but I don't know, we don't know to what extent other folks are putting resources into paying attention to how much we are being, as a sector are being targeted. So we wanted to lead by example and say, hey, this is what we've been seeing. And you have no idea. I mean, I totally get why people don't want to talk about this. Like, I have neurotically gone over these blogs just being like, okay, let's point out for the 17th time that we're not infected. Because every time you put something out, like the first thing is like, you get some asshole just let me parse this properly. You get customers with legitimate concerns who want to ask questions about it. And then you get people like Security Scorecard who'll just come and say, oh, so-and-so's been breached. And you're like, God, okay. Thank you for not reading. But I think that the really important part of this is to say, this is something that's happening to all security vendors. It's happening to a lot of software vendors in general. And the question here becomes, what is it that we're not seeing? What is it we could be seeing? So in this particular case, we talk about a Chinese cluster called Purple Haze. This is something
I think your cat knocked your camera out of frame.
Yeah, he's got creative sort of input here. Sorry, I was saying.
Wait, let me ask you a question before you go on.
Yeah,
wait, because you mentioned, you made it very, very clear there was no breach here. We were not infected here. But it feels like you dodged a little bit of a bullet. There was a description there of a company, a third-party company that managed hardware logistics. I believe they provide you guys with laptops or whatever. They provide hardware logistics to Sentinel-One customers. And during the course of this investigation, you found out that they had been infected. Was there a legitimate supply chain fear there?
Of course, there was a legitimate fear. And I think that's why we're discussing it, because I will say it was a logistics vendor for Sentinel-One. It was.
And they were a customer of yours, obviously. That's how you found it too, right? Well, I don't want to get into the details, but
no. That's part of the problem. Like, we found it as we were investigating this Purple Haze stuff. And it's an interesting situation. It's a difficult situation, because this is where you see the inability to really kind of go after and name and, almost name and shame vendors is so complex, because you go, well, this is upsetting. It's a difficult situation. I don't get the impression, in my view, my personal opinion, I don't see the vendor acting with the sense of urgency and desperation that you would expect a company that's supplying, the Fortune 1000 with their logistical stuff. So that's concerning, but you also can't just come out of the rooftops and say, well, you don't love the response of so-and-so, so we're off, and maybe you guys should be off too. But it is important to discuss. Now, what I'll say is it was relatively easy and manageable given the level of understanding we have about our logistics pipeline and like these endpoints and the monitoring that happens with our internal network to be able to say, okay, like we're not stressed about this aspect of things. But the question then becomes, had this gone on longer, had they, had that strategic incident with the supply chain vendor been leveraged properly, where does that go? Right? Like if you start to change golden master images, like for most companies, I don't think they're in a position to say, yeah, no, that this laptop has what we asked, what we intended for it to have. So it is very much an expression of bewilderment and concern, and not flexing in any way, but rather showing our work and saying, look, I think the real goal here is to say, if you're a vendor, you can't just come out and tell your customers that they should trust you because you've never put out a blog saying that anybody was coming after you. That's some bullshit. That's just dodging the question. Because to me, the question then becomes, are you doing anything to monitor for this? Are you even aware if people are coming after you? And if they do succeed, are you going to tell anybody? And the answer to all those questions is often no. So this is us sort of proof in the pudding saying, look, this is what we've been working on. It includes the DPRK IT worker stuff and whatnot. But with this Chinese cluster, it's particularly interesting because we were not their main target. We were one that they tried to come along the way as they were going after other targets. And it makes you wonder just how much it is that they've been able to strategically leverage in some of these parts.
Can you spend a minute talking about what specifically they were doing around this reconnaissance and circling around Sentinel-One that you detected, and how were you able to pinpoint it to a specific Chinese threat actor? Talk a little bit about some of the tooling that was overlapping there.
Yeah, so I mean, you have some. You've got a sort of an interesting breakdown between Alex and Hagel's work here, where you get your usual shadow pad and reconnaissance infra, some of their own like sort of components around some of this stuff. With what's interesting about it is that what we see originally is relatively small. Right? Like you see reconnaissance efforts, right? Like you go to check some of these components, everything's fine, but there's attempts to sort of like scan what are meant to be internet facing consoles and stuff. So you get in the situation where, you have these components that are meant to be online. They're meant to be front facing, which means we do a ton of monitoring on them. So you realize when there's like a disproportionate amount of like bizarre attempts on some of these components, it's latching onto some of these things that start to unravel a much broader cluster entirely on the basis of like threat intel work. And that's where I go, a lot of organizations may have like incident response teams, they may have SOCs. They don't necessarily have a threat intel team to then pull some of those threads and go, hey, from this really small subset of bizarre activity, what else should we be paying attention to, or what else are we missing? But when you start to pull it, it's like, okay, well, there's like 5 or 6 clusters of activity. And between the information we get with our partners on like, NetFlow, looking at the command and control servers, looking at the other samples, looking at our own telemetry for customers, et cetera, you go, okay, there's 6 different clusters of activity that connect here under what we're calling this purple haze umbrella. And we ended up having to notify a ton of folks who are not our customers because of that threat intel, broader sprawl of work. And you go, okay, well, thank you for the bit of, the thread. We're not pulling it to unravel the sweater. And what you see is like 70 organizations that have, nothing to do with our general visibility, where you go, okay, guys, like you're all kind of fucked. So it's a really interesting circumstance. I think it showcases the value of sort of the threat intel approach and contributions to things like this, but also this is our way of acknowledging that not everybody has a threat intel team to do this. And I still think there's a massive value to coming out front facing and saying, look, we're comfortable because of what we saw and what we did. The rest of you, if you're not aware, go check your backyard. And I think we need to just get used to security vendors doing more of this and insist that they do more of this.
Costin, when these reports come out, you usually scroll to the bottom and look for IOCs. Did we get any sort of... Did we get IOCs here?
I like that.
These fucking reports.
I'll be honest with you. I don't scroll to the bottom. Like what I first do, I just save the whole text into a text file, and then I process that automatically with my tools, which extract all the IOCs, so then automatically they compare them to my databases. So this one, by the way, it had a lot of new stuff, which I found very interesting. And another fascinating thing to me was this designation of APT-15. Well, intrusions with actors that overlap with suspected Chinese cyber espionage groups publicly reported as APT-15.
There's a lot of hedging
so
there.
doing the that thingy, right? But nevertheless, APT-15 attracted my attention in the sense that I was wondering, and I would be very, very curious to also hear what Juan thinks. But APT-15, they've been targeting Israel before. So it's one of those actors with a specific interest in Israel. So for instance, they were exploiting a bunch of IIS vulnerabilities in the past. And I wonder if in this case they were targeting SentinelOne because it's an Israeli company and they somehow thought that can improve their Israeli visibility. Or do you think they were targeting SentinelOne because they're a cyber security vendor? What do you think?
They were already engaged in trying to infect a large customer. Mm-hmm. So to us, what we see it in, at least in that beginning, is almost like an upstream attempt. Mm-hmm. So they were on all-out war with a very big customer in a certain part of Asia, and in an attempt to further their compromise, they started trying to probe some of the cloud infrastructure and tooling, and that's how it ends up coming towards us. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, that doesn't work with the console and whatnot for this customer, so they go back to the customer. But that's essentially what alerts us to it. So it really didn't. It felt more for us being like a tangential target in an attempt to try to sprawl out. It didn't work. They kept going with some of the other stuff that they were doing for this particular institution. But that one was hardcore. And frankly, some of the logistics stuff was also targeting that same vendor, that same organization. So we're like riding side saddle in the middle of this one.
I'm going to ask you a tough question here. When are you guys going to harmonize your naming scheme to match Microsoft's CrowdStrike? In all seriousness, you were not here last week, so let me ask you to weigh in on that. Microsoft and CrowdStrike announced that they were harmonizing naming schemes and matching each other's things.
Typhoon what?
Why isn't SentinelOne a part of this?
Well, first of all, I'm sure our invitation from Microsoft and CrowdStrike is
still in the mail.
In the mail, it's somewhere in a spam folder. Any minute now, I'm sure we're going to be singing Kumbaya with our friends at Microsoft and CrowdStrike to show, the importance of this endeavor. I have no intention of harmonizing shit because,
great line.
Yeah.
Let me set it up this way. The general reaction in the industry is that this is a tiny, small step in the right direction. It doesn't address anything wrong with naming whatsoever, but it's just like
what the fuck is it? What is
this? Is what Kostin and Miko said to me last week. It's a tiny step in the right direction. Now we know what this one is calling that one. It doesn't address the underlying issues around why naming is terrible and why we prefer the numbers versus the names. I'm looking at your report here, right? I see Purple Haze, Shadowpad, APT-15, UNC 5174. It's like,
Nylon
what the fuck is going on?
Keychain.
Yeah. And the problem would not be we are naming other people's stuff. And the problem that you get in this particular case, I think, is probably the more telling reason as to why I am very unenthused and not unsupportive, but unimpressed with the idea of a few vendors deciding to talk to each other. Look, the only reason this is news is
not even talking to each other. It's even worse than that.
It is worse than that. But that's the point. And I'm joking about I might be facetious and say talking to each other, but it is talking to each other because Microsoft and CrowdStrike are two companies that are famous for keeping their analysts from having human interactions with other human beings. So of course this is a novelty that you somehow decided it's okay to talk to each other and share names. They didn't say they're sharing IOCs. They didn't say they're sharing any of the underlying data for why they name anything. They're just going to fucking chat and like they're in a Slack somewhere together and all their managers are watching them. And then somebody, starts to type out an IOC and somebody slaps their hand and they go, sorry, our name is Volt whatever. What do you guys see? But I think the ridiculous of it is underscored by something like what you're pointing at, right? APT 15, UNC 5174, under purple haze, sort of, kind of, maybe not really, which is the Chinese clusters have gotten really complex. It's really fucking hard to just like split some of these teams evenly. Know which one is like the initial access part versus this other part versus the one that does the telco tooling versus the one that's like just we're seeing a component like ShadowPad that's being managed and developed and controlled by a third-party organization that works for the Chinese, that supplies the Chinese government, which means that it's a part of like 17 different APTs that all use ShadowPad, but not exactly the same version and so on. So like you look at this and you go, the clustering itself, the bucketing is not simple. It's not trivial. It is dependent on really specific things. So yes, we can slap a bunch of names on this shit and we can compare names, but that doesn't matter because we don't have comparable buckets to look at with each other. And that's really my issue with all this bullshit from folks like Microsoft and CrowdStrike in this thing. It's like, if you told me they have a Synapse instance and CrowdStrike is a Synapse instance and we have a Synapse instance, and what we're going to do from now on is we've implemented a power up that means that we can, use some kind of, partial secret sharing crypto newfangled thingy to be able to check with each other if we've seen the same bucket of IOCs and what is it called, then I'd be very excited. Then I think you say, okay, you've made a meaningful contribution in saying we don't want to talk to each other, we don't want to share with each other, but we have some mechanism wherein we can check with one another without tipping our hand as to what our original thing is. And at that point, I think that would be fucking awesome. I think I would genuinely hat tip to these folks and say, sign us up, let's do this. But to just celebrate the fact that like someone's going to ask somebody else what their naming is, and then you have two names to worry about, and you go, okay, well, now I have two fucking opaque names. And the IOCs and the composition of these buckets is what? And they go, well, maybe if you pay for our reporting services and then ask really nicely, then maybe you'll have some buckets of IOCs. It's like, oh, fuck off. It's the same thing as before. That's it, man.
Costin, you have any
Yes,
optimism that this shit ever gets fixed, or we're just going to be mired in this and bumbling from name to name forever?
Two things here. One is you cannot solve this without blockchain. I now realize that the only way you can ever solve this is with blockchain. And you know why? Because what one was, I'm half joking, what one was describing about the power up that somehow talks to other people's stuff, but doesn't want to reveal what you have. And so you kind of want to check what the others have in their hands, but without revealing what you have and without knowing what they have. Mm-hmm. So for that, I think what you're looking for is a blockchain-based solution with some kind of equivalent of being able to prove that you own something without saying what you are actually owning. And if the other party has the same thingy, then you marry or something like that. So you guys get engaged.
Yeah. This guy got blockchain to fix his elections, and now blockchain is fixing everything.
It's the future, man. This is the future. Yeah,
the blockchain value,
quantum AI blockchain for
for 4D
with 4D the power up.
Yeah,
maybe 5D. I don't know. And the other thing which I was thinking, you dropped a very sensitive word in there, and I don't know if people noticed that you said the N word.
What the fuck are you talking about?
The net flow, of course. You dropped the net flow, and I think it's a bit like cheating in a way when these poor threat actors, they come after your infrastructure, and then you find their CNC. You get the net flow for their CNC, and then you find all their hard work victims, 70 of them, and then you warn everyone. It almost feels like cheating.
Yeah, well,
and they
fuck
are like,
them.
What just hit us, bro?
Yeah. Why aren't you doing this more?
It's expensive, I guess.
And that NetFlow is expensive. It's hard to come by. It's actually quite problematic in the rules around its sharing, particularly in the United States and other places where you have overzealous arguments about what can constitute wiretapping and sharing certain kinds of stuff. Just to make it really kind of obvious to the listeners who may not be familiar with the NetFlow market, part of the complexities of the NetFlow market is that in many ways, it should not be a market in the United States. Most NetFlow, the greatest NetFlow visibility comes from ISPs and carriers, and they're in a very complicated position when it comes to they can leverage that data. In theory, they have complexities around selling that data or sharing that data with certain kinds of organizations. They definitely can't with the government, but they can with each other, but they can't with other vendors, but stub networks can do it with other vendors. So what you get is a very complex space, a very partial visibility of a thing that can't be openly offered the way that it should. So this is why, whenever you hear us talking about NetFlow, yeah, there's some services out there, and there's folks that sell interesting things. You've got Team Cumry and so on, but the best NetFlow tends to come from asking friends for favors, and thankfully we have good friends who are very interested in this fight, and that's where you end up, as Kostin said, right? You check a C2 for NetFlow, you have to do a lot of parsing. There's some data science, there's a lot of magic that has to go into it, and then you walk away with 75 victims, and you go, well, fuck. We don't even have customer relationships with these. How do you notify? Who's going to tell so and so and so on? But it is a power, like Kostin, you might say that, but I mean, this is just the easier mode version of, I don't know, calling a VPS provider in some country and asking them to install a TAP, calling, so and so and checking on the DNS resolutions of a very specific place. These sorts of shit have been getting done in the threat intel space for a long time, very quietly. And to be honest, I don't feel bad for the threat actors. They're in this asymmetrically capable position to do all kinds of fucked up stuff. We keep catching them doing fucked up things. They have insane resources. A lot of them are using their own ISPs in their countries to just screw over victims who had never stood a chance. Not to mention the 0 days and all the sort of sophisticated, expensive infrastructure that goes into it. So yeah, if there are some cheat codes along the way that folks in the industry can use for no profit other than to try to find more victims and find the sprawl of these things and notify folks, yeah, fuck yeah, we'll leverage whatever nook and cranny we can, short of breaking the law. And I think, and even then, I have some reservations. I just not yet.
Speaking of nooks and crannies and short of breaking the law, we got news out of Citizen Lab. We got news out of Citizen Lab yesterday on Paragon, this graphite software being found on iPhones in Italy and another part of Europe. Fascinating little report out of Citizen Lab documenting zer-click 0 day on iPhones patched in iOS 18 point something a couple of months ago, just updated by Apple yesterday, confirming that this is here. Two things that stood out here for me, Kostin, and I read this report. One, it confirms for the first time that Paragon Graphite actually works on newer, fully updated iPhones, which was not a capability that we've seen publicly documented in the past. And in this case, they were targeting a variety of journalists, one named in Italy and an unnamed European reporter that passed along their phones to send to Citizen Lab for analysis. What stood out in this report to you, Kostin?
Well, first of all, I like the fact that Citizen Lab keeps pushing on this topic, which is it's turning into a bigger and bigger scandal in Europe, and there's also ongoing discussions between the Italian government and Paragon, because the Italian government, they kind of admitted that they were targeting some activists with it. However, they are denying.
They were claiming the Italian government did an investigation and came out and publicly acknowledged that they were using this tool to track, I believe, people sympathetic to migrant boats and stuff coming into Italy. Am I getting it right?
Apologies, you are breaking up a bit. So they were targeting who?
They were targeting these migrant activists, pro-migration activists, right?
Correct. Yes. however, they are denying that they've been targeting the journalists in Italy. And this is like kind of turning into some kind of a scandal between the Italian government and Paragon, because Paragon are saying like, hey, we're happy to work with you guys just to find out what is going on. And the Italian government is like, no, we're just going to fire you guys. And then Paragon is saying like, no, actually, we're going to fire you first. We fire you first. So who's firing who? Like, I don't know. But again, props to Citizen Lab for pushing on this topic and trying to understand more. What stood out in this story is the fact that they were able to do physical forensics on one of the phones, which
on
essentially
at least two of the phones.
On two of the phones. That confirms again with high confidence that they were targeted with the Paragon graphite mercenary spyware. And they kind of locate the method by which they were targeted through these iMessage accounts, which is present on both device logs. They refer to it as Attacker One. Kind of a pity that they're not saying the iCloud account. I think that would have been nice for people to be able to search their logs. But I would assume that Apple is also notifying everyone who was ever touched by this particular iCloud account. It was also kind of nice that they dropped this CNC server at Edis. There's the IP address in the blog post that you can immediately, check in your net flows. My recommendation pretty much to anyone who's a high value target and has an iPhone has always been to have a private VPN that you control, and to log all the network traffic, save it forever. So whenever a report like this drops, you go back to your records and you search for that IP address in the net flow, in the PCAPs, just to see if you've been targeted. And if you've been targeted, you can see how much data was exfiltrated around that time, and so on and so on. I thought, by the way, another interesting report that maybe we didn't discuss much in detail was this iVerify report, in which they were talking about a new vulnerability that was silently patched, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And,
we talked about this last week with Miko briefly.
Correct,
but yeah.
a bit. We touched it a bit. And I thought also that it's interesting that there's more and more proof that this successful attacks against iOS devices are happening all around the world. And there's a wider and wider range of people, from activists to journalists to politicians to researchers to administrators to programmers and developers, who are now legitimate targets in some people's eyes for infection with these super expensive tools. I wish, of course, that Citizen Lab dropped a bit more details on these things that they call. But we
always wish for more from Citizen Lab, right? Like
Correct.
those guys hold back a lot of stuff,
pushing.
and they silo a lot of this mobile security research in all seriousness.
Correct. And it's always like a good discussion if that's justified. I mean, if they drop more details and they lose the ability to track these guys through the fingerprints, for instance, still the most mysterious part of these blogs to me are these pretzel Android indicators that they never disclosed in detail. In particular, they call one of them is a big pretzel, and I think the other one is small pretzel.
You can always tell which reports are coming down the pike, right?
Well, yeah. let's see if we're gonna get some Android reports as well. To me, again, I've said this many times. People like, which one's better, iPhones, Androids, without getting into some kind of a holy battle between the two parties, religions, however you want to call them. I and many other people still think that you have a lot more forensic artifacts on iPhones that you get on the Android. So for that reason alone, me personally, I think I prefer, from this point of view, iOS devices, which give you a better ability to research and understand what's been happening on them, when it comes to being high value targets.
Juanito, go.
I
have a bunch of questions for you, but I'll let you just kind of parse what your thoughts.
Without really going deep into any of that, I actually wanted to latch on to Kostin's comment about the monitoring. And I always think about this, right? Like Kostin's got this great setup, and he's just fucking dying for somebody to pop his iPhone. And then everybody else, we have these conversations, and you go, like, how the hell are we supposed to, have this wonderful Kostin setup? We are not sponsored. This podcast is not yet sponsored by anybody, which I think says a lot about the cursing, probably. But I was looking at tail scale, and I wanted to ask Kostin on this setup. So, like, something really interesting, right? Like, of course, you can go and spend some time and set your own thing up and have all your own out of band tapping and set everything up in your own little vault, and then have some way of searching the logs and check your own APT database, which everybody has, just like Kostin at home, like all these things. Now, for the folks who are too lazy to check their home APT DB and maybe don't have their perfectly set up sort of networking part, I thought it was really interesting to see how much like Tailscale is, which is like this WireGuard offering, is essentially starting to push this as a service. Essentially, you go on one of their paid tiers, and this like private VPN provider or setup, right, which is mostly set up for your devices, now has all of the like logging for passive DNS, logging for different, you can even have like MDM and everything all correlated into a place that you can search, and it's like $6 a device or something, or $6 a user. I'm curious, Kostin, how you feel about it, because if we like, this is me trying to find a commodity solution for like being somebody that cares but does not have the infrastructure in place, will not have the time to really like make the most of it, and so on. I'm curious if that ends up being, in your eyes, an appropriate way to say, okay, folks, for those of you that want to be this thing, like, this is a way to do it.
And Mike, just as an addendum to that, doesn't it bother you guys that we are so dependent on one small research unit in Toronto for these research papers, that only Citizen Lab is capable of this? Like, what kind of crazy is this?
Where's the Apple tag?
Yeah. Where's Apple Tag 1? And you mentioned iOS gives you a lot more telemetry and forensics data and so on. Didn't we just get from Android 16 the ability to do our own logging? And we just celebrated the new version of Android giving you this kind of logging that Juanito is asking for. No, I just wanted you to answer his question around, like, is there going to be some sort of commercial piece that helps people with this?
Well, I haven't. By the way, I haven't used Tailscale, so I don't know. Like, question to one is, do you use it yourself? Like, do you like it? You use it yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I like it a lot as like a simple setup for, like, it's essentially managed WireGuard. And I'll take it, considering like it means you have like SSO and everything set up properly, and you can go, okay, with my Gmail account, with my Google Workspace, without anybody having like a central server in the middle of this, I can designate how my endpoints connect to each other. I can have, let's say, a GCP server that I'm using as an exit node. So if when I go to Singapore, I can just redirect my traffic through my own nodes, and or have it come out of the node in my house, or whatever it is that you want. And you've got sort of all the encryption managed in between. In itself, I've used it for this just as like a practical measure of like, I need to, connect back to some other server somewhere. And also, I don't really want to rely on some commercial VPN to like route my traffic to wherever, but I don't want my traffic to just be kind of, going on its own. I'll admit that I haven't fully replaced what I'm using or embraced this route when it comes to the network logging, but I'm not happy with what I've got. And this is definitely a thing that to me goes, hey, I can solve this with money and have like an 80% solution or a 90% solution. It is very tempting. So I haven't gone the full route, but I'm basically asking you the question I was going to ask you offline for the benefit of everybody else in here of going, okay, like I get it. I'm not naive. There's a company in between. You hope their end-to-end setup and stuff is what you want it to be. You have a remote management aspect of this. That's always going to be an aspect of vulnerability of some sort. But considering that most folks do not have the solution at all and are not sitting on any kind of, the connective tunnels, the databasing, the logging, the parsing, the whatnot. And what they really want to do is not any of that, but actually the part where you compare those, like what's in those logs to something else. I'm curious to what extent Tailscale, which was a company that was just basically selling VPN setups, is effectively sideways sneaking into being this sort of like mobile device MDM type network coverage solution, whether they know to sell themselves that way or not.
Well, by the way, this reminds me a lot of the old school problem when we were giving people advice to use Yara rules, and they were like, "Wow, this is amazing! Let's use Yara rules." And then, like, how do we use Yara rules?
Right.
We have like 15,000 computers. How do we run Yara on all our 15,000 computers? And like, well, that's your problem. So it's in a way a bit similar if you want to. And I do realize that it's difficult. It's quite difficult to have all this set up. And across my technical friends, sometimes it's very sad in a way to see that actually almost nobody have logs for their phones. They don't have these network logs, DNS logs, and so on. While some of them, I have logs, but when only when I'm at home or only when I'm at work, but not like full-time logs and not everything for sure. So in a way, I think it's nice to have this kind of solution. So of course, you have to trust the company who is setting up all these things, like you said. And we have been helping people setting up like this kind of private setups for high value targets for a year and a half, I think already. So just helping people to set up their own private VPN servers, WireGuard profiles on their phones, logging, detection, and so on. But it's definitely not cheap and not easy to do for pretty much anybody nowadays. So that's an interesting solution which sits somewhere in the middle in terms of convenience and price.
Well, I'm also curious to what extent you could use this, and again, not sponsored by this fucking company. I think they're cool, but but I'm also curious, like to the extent that you're basically providing this service to folks, or at least the checking service for folks who really need it. I think something we've always tried to set up with the kind of efforts that we do pro bono, or that other folks do pro bono, is like if you can have like a one-click deploy solution for other folks at a relatively minimal cost, and the logs will make it to the right place, like that's basically gold standard. That's what you hope for. You can say an activist, hey, go set this up, point this stuff here, and like for $5 a month, like we're now golden. And hell, I'll cover the $5 for you, right? Like that's the hope for what you can do. I've been really curious if this is the kind of 90% solution where hell, like we make it a point to put some money in a bucket and say, hey, activists, like go set this up, send these logs our way, and like we'll check that for you. And I don't know, man. Let's
sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Costin, on the same front,
we're in business, people. Let's go.
On the same front, you've been talking about Graphene OS as a player here. There's a little bit of controversy happening, and I'm hoping you can help me understand it. Google released with Android 16 a new OS version of this Android open source project, AOSP. Apparently, they did not release some things, device trees for Pixel devices. Anyway, the folks at Graphene OS is making speculating that this AOSP, this Android open source program, will go away altogether. Do you understand what's happening? Can you help the people kind of...
We were just celebrating this like 2 days ago, like 2 episodes ago. What the fuck's going on? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to say that while we hype and promote iOS, everybody has a Graphene OS phone or 2 or 10 on the table next to their iOS phone that they hype like, yeah, that's my main device, and like that is the honeypot actually. And then all the secret work you do it on the other Graphene
Costin
OS
is letting out all
devices.
his
Out here
secrets.
telling secrets. Yeah.
Well, again, it's not the first time I said it, but like ideally you have a main, like a phone that everybody knows about, then you have another phone that you keep it kind of hidden, but still you show it from time to time and say like, this is the phone that I use. Then you have another phone, which is the one that you actually use for the sensitive stuff, and a few more that use for more sensitive stuff, I guess. I don't know what other people use it for. I use it just to play games. So
Is Android not going to be open source anymore?
I think Android will probably be open source, but there was a bunch, let's say, of a bit of frustration from the Graphene OS developers, which are, by the way, very active on X. And it was, I think, about a month ago that they lost one of their main developers, which was, according to their own words, was recruited to fight into a war. And people were like speculating, where did he get drafted? Was it Russia? Was it Ukraine?
Point now, it's which war?
Yeah, exactly. Which war? And basically, since that person was drafted to go to war, there's no news. Like they haven't heard of him, so they don't know where he is. And of course, there was a bit of worry. Like, does he still have access now? The army of that country has access to his Graphene OS development. Well, they obviously shut down all the access until it's clear where he is nowadays. But people were kind of speculating that he was drafted into the Ukrainian army to fight the
You hope
invasion
it was
force.
the Ukrainian army, I think, is the point, right?
This is like what was being speculated on X. But yeah, they lost this top developer, and they were kind of preparing. They knew that the new version of Android was coming for a month, and they were trying to prepare it in advance to get ready for it. If you ask me personally, I'm perfectly happy with the version 15 that is now the foundation of Graphene OS, and I don't think it's a huge rush to upgrade. Of course, it's fantastic to have the greatest version of Android with the latest kernels and security optimizations. But if Google is somehow making it more difficult for people to customize it, right? Because in the end, it's all about customization. So if what you release is one thing, but it needs a lot of work to customize it for a specific set of hardware, then the amount of companies who can actually leverage that will decrease. It will be just the big players. And the big players, they have all these kind of deals with Google in which they actually pay Google for having Google Play installed on the phone. So that's like kind of a big part of the deal, that they make money from having that ability in the operating system. So the Graphene OS folks, they were saying that in the future they may have to develop their own hardware as well. At the moment, they rely heavily on Google Pixel hardware, and they were saying like, yeah, in the future, if we want to be able to do more integration, customization, we may have to develop our own hardware, which will cost somewhere in the range of tens of $millions. Me personally, I like the fact that you can just buy a Google Pixel off the shelf anywhere. You wipe it, you essentially unlock it, you wipe it, and you install Graphene OS, and you get a whole new level of security as an experience on it. And you can even get Google Play and everything running on it with eSIMs. So it's super, super nice, and it's become quite, let's say, usable. Like, while the first versions of Graphene OS, they made it a bit more difficult for people to use decent applications, I don't know, banking apps and so on. More recent versions made it easier. Unfortunately, there's still some apps which they don't play nice if you want. So they use like a Google framework to authenticate the device, which, for instance, makes it difficult to run the most recent versions of Revolut in there. I don't know how popular Revolut is in the United States, but here
it's not.
Everybody has Revolut. Like everyone, even
It's
like
Venmo for you guys,
it's
right?
like Venmo, right? Correct.
Right.
While I have no idea what is Venmo, everyone gets
Same
their
reason.
salary
I
in
had to
their
Google
Revolut
Revolut.
account. You had to
Wow.
Google Revolut.
Salary. That's different than Venmo then. Like, that's crazy.
It's super, super popular, and I admit I'm like an early user of Revolut, and somehow I think it's a good value for money. You get a lot of things and a lot of nice options, like for instance, diamond subscription to chess.com for one of their top plans. Which
that's some
I'm
that's some
sold.
niche shit. That's amazing.
For you get like a Tinder subscription. So there you go.
I gotta Google what Tinder is. Quickly,
Wow.
on the mobile front, a story that passed through last week that we never got, and I want to touch on it quickly, is this report out of these folks, Local Mess. It's localmess.github.io on Meta and Yandex de-anonymizing Android users using like some real sneaky techniques, silently listening on fixed ports and so on. I just looked at the blog again, and it looks like it's been discontinued. Things are changed and so on. Kostin, can you talk a little bit about what they were seeing here around, like just using these really, really sneaky things to identify people?
Yeah, and I was wondering, like, why in the world is this working on your smartphone? In particular, this attack only works on Android. So it was an attack, or like a methodology, however you want to call it, a fingerprinting mechanism targeting Android users of different Yandex tools and different Meta packages. So the way this works, actually, on Android, is possible to bind to the localhost interface. So an application can register as a service that binds to there. And then in a web browser, you can actually use technologies embedded in the web browser to connect to localhost and talk to the application that is installed on the device, which is kind of scary, if you ask me. Just imagine if maybe that application has a vulnerability, which means that you can suddenly exploit it from the web. It's like, I don't see any good reason why would you ever be willing to allow something like that, this web page, to open a connection to localhost. Like, if you ask me, the browser shouldn't allow this to happen. But nevertheless, what they were doing, they were listening on the localhost, and then from the web apps, they would connect to the app installed on the device and essentially know who that is, who that person is, so then
part
they
of
can
that big
target
profiling
them.
that their business model is built around,
Yeah,
right?
which is part of their surveillance capitalism monetization scheme, to use some kind words, if you will. And leveraging this technique, basically who is browsing to the website. You can de-anonymize users. Like, this technique could be used like in all sorts of different places to de-anonymize visitors. So yeah, just a reminder about.
Is this something that someone has
issues.
to fix, or we just rely on these companies not to be shady and shitty?
Well, I would rely, like, again, different browsers, by the way, different browsers behave in different ways. So for instance, I think that they mentioned that Brave was not susceptible to this kind of technique. However, other browsers, they patched, like Google Chrome patched and so on. And I was still wondering, like, what about some other browsers? How do they handle that? And in the end, you have to implement this kind of a mitigation in the browser, first of all. And secondly...
So this is a browser maker issue.
Yeah, well, if you
Who's to fix what?
Well, the companies behind these wonderful applications, they maybe should stop doing this shit.
That's what I'm saying.
First of all. Two, maybe the people who develop the operating system, like, how come that on iOS it's fine, but on Android is not? Like, so the operating system people maybe improve things a little bit. And third of all, the browser people, they can also improve security a bit to prevent this fingerprinting technique, like connections to localhost through these WebRTC mechanisms.
One, you got a
think
thought at all? I
the
mean, just a quick update.
Yeah.
After this blog post was posted, Meta and Facebook Pixel Script is no longer sending any packets or requests to local hosts, so they've been shamed enough into stop doing it. And Yandex has also stopped the practice that is described below. So it looks like we're starting to see some movement on shaming them into stopping doing this mess. But the reality is these companies are going to just, the surveillance capitalism world, they'll push as far as they
but
can.
what's the shame, right? Like all we're saying is, well, somebody caught us, so we're going to stop. And that's not a discussion of like, well, what about your practices and so on makes it so that, you know, you are an untrustworthy player until somebody catches you with your hand in the cookie jar, and then you don't apologize, you just pull it out. And you go, my bad, I'm going to go find a different way to put my hand in the cookie jar now.
This is SOP for Meta, though. I mean, they just push the envelope as far as it can, get a slap on their wrist, pull back, push the envelope some more. This is why I had to delete my Facebook and all these accounts. It's like...
Well, it's what makes, I think this is what makes some of the larger operating system wars, especially on mobile, so interesting, right? Like Google has not had the same incentive that Apple has had to fight war against the ad platform folks. And that's where you usually get this kind of overzealousness and overreach, where somebody says, you know, if we just do this one little shady thing, we have just a little bit more information, we can do, you know, more with what we've got. And it doesn't really matter. Like what you're basically saying is we're trusting the integrity of these different providers, which even they've shown us they have no integrity. Like Facebook, Meta has shown us they've done it repeatedly, many
Uber was caught
times.
Doing this shit. Uber was caught doing this kind of spying on.
It's almost a why wouldn't you? On, you know, if you can, why not? And I think that's where Apple has really shown in its willingness to say, well, then you can't. And then people lose their shit, right? Like the idea that like there's this blocking for browsers, that there's this sandboxing and entitlements that mean that like on iOS, like this one thing just can't communicate with the other. And it's really interesting because I think that there's a certain amount of hijacking of other conversations that happens on the basis of this, right? Like people complaining about locking down of certain APIs in iOS and like locking down of certain APIs on macOS and what the browser can communicate with or not. Some of them, a small subset of these folks are upset that capabilities are being taken away of things that they just like to do or they feel they should be able to do with their devices. Then you have this much larger cynical contingent that's jumping on that bandwagon, but what they want is for their monetization scheme to not be disrupted. And because Google is basically two-faced in this, because they want to be able to do this thing while they also maintain an operating system and they maintain a browser, you get this very strange kind of like, just
the
two-facedness
platform trying to police itself. Yeah, well, it's like Microsoft is a security vendor and selling security services.
Right, like not quite blocking it, but not relishing in it, but not putting it away. And look, there is corollaries to this that I think are quite interesting. Mostly, I was reading a discussion about the Apple Intelligence rollout yesterday on iOS. And
what Apple Intelligence rollout?
Yeah, exactly. The fucking shit show that is Apple Intelligence. But what was really interesting about that shit show is that what this sort of like naive observer was saying was, well, Apple Intelligence is poised to be the best application of AI on these mobile devices because by virtue of being part of iOS, it can break the sandbox and see what all these other applications, what information they have, what's in your mail app, what's in your calendar app, what's in whatever. Whereas like any application that is not a native iOS application, right? Like Google Gemini and ChatGPT, by virtue of these same safety mechanisms, can't go looking at the data from all these other places. So it adds sort of to the tragedy of the Apple Intelligence rollout being such a shit show that it is technically the one that should have the most access. But look at how those dynamics play out, right? Like the measure we want for privacy is what keeps these other vendors from being able to spider out and do this whole like, AI as an OS type mentality, which is maybe why you have Google, why you have OpenAI buying I/O and like all this other shit. But then it also kind of creates this bizarre centralization of that capability that means there's that much more of an onus on the provider itself to say, hey, are you policing how this information gets accessed? What do you do with the opportunity you've got? Nobody else is going to be able to do the same thing. I think the bizarre thing for Android is if we really ask for this lockdown, you're almost creating you're furthering the antitrust position for Google because Google is an ads vendor and an ecosystem maintainer. And that's where, the bizarre argument about like, should they be able to own Chrome? And we go, no, because whomever is going to buy it is going to be worse. You go, yeah, but look at how misaligned the incentives are in this process.
Right. It's like Google shipping ad blockers in Chrome while being an advertising marketing company.
What solved the Adobe Flash problem? Adobe had a good security team. It took 0 days seriously. It did all the patching. It put out the fucking advisories and whatever. They never fixed the problem because at the end of the day, their relationship with their product meant that they were never going to rejigger it. And the only thing that solved the problem was somebody
Jobs
bigger,
writing a letter. Yeah.
Well, Steve Jobs owning an ecosystem that just said, fuck you, you're not welcome here. Yeah. And they didn't say it over the vulnerability issue. They said it because of the battery life abuse, like the inability to sort of control these runaway resources that were going to basically tank the early iPhones because you couldn't like that same discussion we just had about drones, right? Like you can only put so much energy and so much compute in this device, and if some fucking runaway background website that does like a little pocket tank game is like killing 60% of your battery life in an hour, we're fucking done here, right? Like that device does not work. So
and that's how Flash died.
Yeah.
Because they pulled it out to the iPhone, right?
And I think that's precisely what we need to talk about. Like, we need to have more discussions about these like system dynamics that are primarily matters of like economics, because that is where we see the best possible mechanism for change with security. It is not security itself. Security itself is not what makes people do away with capabilities, not willingly anyways.
All right, we're heading into the 2-hour mark, and out of respect for Juanito's birthday and giving him some time to go celebrate, we'll close the show we'll close the show quietly with some shout outs. Costin, you got anything on mind that you want to shout out? Any plugs? What's going on in your life?
Sure. By the way, shout outs and I think you also did shout outs to the same wonderful guy, our good friend Mr. Matt, who started his own dojo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu dojo in Dubai.
Correct. So Matt, 2 episodes ago, Jester Jiu-Jitsu, Matt Swish out in Dubai. He's got his own Jiu-Jitsu school and doing teaching. Yes, Matt Swish has got his own Jester's Jiu-Jitsu school. He sent me a t-shirt that I wore two episodes ago that none of you guys noticed. By the way, shout out to the folks at LabsCon. Our call for papers ends on June 23rd in 10 days. The deadline is in 10 days, so get your submissions in. Costin, any more shout-outs?
The best research. Get your best research to LabsCon.
Absolutely. Juanito?
So I, as always, don't necessarily have a well-prepared list of shout-outs. I will say thank you to all of the amazing people who've already been scrambling for my birthday. I try not to celebrate my birthday. It kind of like I have a very complicated history with it, but my friends have not taken no for an answer, and a lot of the folks who are hardcore listeners of the podcast are all swarming to my house tonight. So I really appreciate this.
Costin, you got an invite?
Yeah.
No, but I was wondering, are you guys gonna research purple haze?
I hope so. I think that would be a much better outcome for these things. But no, so thanks to everybody who's kind of made it a point. And frankly, to you guys, like, it's a much better way to start my birthday to come on episode 50 of this insane ride. Like, I've been reeling ever since you guys mentioned that we're like almost at a year. It still does not feel that way. 2 more episodes. Now, on that note, to circle back on the LabsCon thing, we are almost full up on sponsors, which is a really nice thing to say. Usually that's the bigger panic here, especially in this under these circumstances. Let me check whose logos are already up, because I know we're signing some final contracts right now. But along the way, Our friends at Binarly, the Vertex Project, Silent Push, Acer, Validin, Dreadnode, Luta Security, Sublime Security. Who am I forgetting?
Cisco
Detections AI,
Talos.
Cisco Talos. Oh, Cisco Talos has been huge every year. Our friend Mitch Neff, Vitor Ventura.
Our friends at Dreadnode, Will Pearson, our friends at Dreadnode as well, also signed back up again this year, along with Detections AI. Our friends at Framework Laptops, who are providing those amazing laptops.
I finally got my own. I built the DIY. Honestly, I assembled it. There really is. It's like just a fun thing to do, but it wasn't that hard.
Shout out to Framework.
Dude, Framework, Binarly, Luta, Dreadnode, these folks have been with us like every year. Acer, like I know that this kind of sounds like the shilling part of the podcast, but honestly, I have to shill because we don't really give these people anything other than the opportunity to support this community endeavor, to keep us from having a vendor hall, to keep us from giving away people's marketing data, their emails, to keep us from the annoying shit that we hate at RSA and at Black Hat and all these other places. So they deserve all the credit they can get for genuinely supporting this community endeavor. And in that vein, honoring their commitment and honoring all the work that we're doing, I keep my eyes off of the CFP portal until it's closed. So I have no idea what's in there right now. Maybe there's a million talks. Maybe there's 10. You motherfuckers better bring your A game. This is finally, like, we have our threat intel stage. We have our place for OSINT and AI and cyber attacks and everything. Fucking use it. I missed it during the pandemic. We lost it for a while. It's not a given that we will have it forever. Every year I'm famous for going on that stage and saying, we don't talk about next year because I have no fucking clue what's going to happen next year, what wars we're in, where any of us are going to work, what budgets we're going to have, what sponsors are going to be available. So make the fucking most of these venues while they're here. We've lost already plenty of them. A lot of conferences have ended in the past couple of years. A lot of conferences never came back. Some of them became, shadows of what their former selves. So bring us your best stuff and win that fucking prize. Those Framework laptops are sweet. So I hope to see all of you soon there and to have an amazing agenda to announce. And while we're at that, as inadvisable as this is, Offensive AI Con, also sister conference of ours, our friends at Dreadnode are throwing it in San Diego. Their CFP is also open. Very different sort of set of topics. Super excited for this one. So I'm submitting. I'll be there. A couple of our folks are going to be there. So hopefully folks will also pay attention to that.
San Diego is one of my favorite cities. So I might pop out there and join you guys.
Dude, come.
With that, happy birthday again, my friend. Friday the 13th is a fascinating day to have a birthday when a war is broken out in Israel and Iran. But here we are. Thank you, guys. And we'll catch you guys again next week.
Thanks, everyone.